Welcome, folks, to episode 7 of the Matias Sports Podcast. Again, I have another great guest. I have Jon Lyons from WEEI. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ken?
I'm doing well, thank you. If you want to explain what you do to the folks out there, feel free. You're more than
Yeah,
welcome.
so I work for WEEI as a radio host, kind of all over the place, weekends, nights, some days, kind of, like I said, all over the place.
Hmm.
Also write and do video for New England Football Journal. You can find us Patriots post-game shows after every game. We have Patriots Pulse off-season show every Tuesday night. Like I said, I do some written work for that site as well as the TV show and podcast Straight Facts Homie with Mason Souza and Walter Sabina. So like to keep myself busy, Ken, in a few different things at once.
Absolutely. Good thing you brought up New England Football Journal. I watched some of you guys' podcasts with John Saradines, and you guys do a wonderful job between Kevin,
Appreciate
John,
that.
yourself, all the contributors that I'm probably missing. I mean, great coverage. They're all over Twitter. They probably got YouTube. I mean, you guys are probably all over the internet. So,
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, I do primarily Patriot stuff for them, but they do a great job of local football, like high school football, local college football. So if you're into that as well, check out John and Kevin and Adam, their work. They do such a great job with that stuff as well. And it's something that doesn't get covered enough, I think, across New England, and they do a great job with it.
absolutely. I mean, besides the local papers, the Standard Times, Fall River, different kind of
Yeah.
papers, they're big on high school coverage as well. So shout out to the kids that do well in all kind of high school sports and on the football side as well. But I just want to dive right into it. Patriots talk. About a month away from like training camp, give or take. What's your thoughts so far? How the offseason has transpired between Bill Belichick, I should say, leaving and parting ways with Kraft till June 24th, I should say.
Yeah,
From
so
January to June.
January 11th was the day Bill left, and
Hmm.
from then to now, I mean, we're talking a little over 6 months, so it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like maybe it's been that long, but it has been that long. And the Patriots are in a very interesting place. You could argue this is their biggest offseason in the last 25 years, right? Because
Hmm.
even in 2000, when they hired Belichick, you didn't know it was going to be the greatest coach of all time. And in 2000, when they draft Tom Brady, you didn't know it was going to be the greatest quarterback of all time, right? And then even when Brady left, well, you still had Bill and you still had some infrastructure there and you still made the playoffs one time after Brady left. But now, okay, Brady's gone and Bill's gone, and a lot of guys are gone. I mean, you look around that locker room, Ken, how many guys there have won a Super Bowl? I mean, Gerard Mayo won one as a player, and then you look at the roster, David Andrews has won one, Dietrich Wise has
Wise,
won
yep.
one, Jonathan Jones, but it's not a big list of guys
Hmm.
on that roster. Whereas for 20 years, you always had a chunk of guys that had won a Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
Even that 10-year gap from '04 to 14, there were a chunk of guys on that 14 team, and not that many, but enough that it had some Super Bowl success, whether there's Brady and Vince Wilfork, plus the coaching staff. But now, very few guys that contributed to those banners hanging up in Gillette Stadium. So it's a totally, I don't want to say complete overhaul, but it almost is at least
Hmm.
a big fresh start for the Patriots. And obviously, they bring in Drake May, they have Gerard Mayo as the head coach. And I think the Patriots are in a spot where you want to see progress this year. So last year, basically everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, right? They got the
Hmm.
worst quarterback play in the NFL. They got bad receiver play, inconsistent offensive line play. Coaching staff 2 years ago on offense was a mess. Last year was a little bit better, but still not great, right? The Bill O'Brien and assistants fit really just was not a great fit overall. Their special teams which is something that when they were winning Super Bowls, they were top 3 in special
Hmm.
teams nearly every year. Last few years, they've been near the bottom. Last year, they were 31st in DVOA and special teams. 2021, they lost multiple games on special teams,
Hmm.
right? And last year, too, we look at it, they lost 13 games. You take those 13 games, look at them. Nearly half of them they lost by one possession or within 1 to 2 possessions. And you can go back all the way to week 1 against Philly, one possession loss, week 2 against Miami, one possession loss. They had a loss to the Bills in Buffalo, one possession, the Raiders, one possession. So the Colts, the Giants, all these games were one possession losses. So if they can just get average quarterback play, not even good, Ken, but average quarterback play, and average offensive line play, they can be a better football team. Now, let's not confuse better with being an elite contender or a great team, but they can take a step forward from 4 wins as they
Hmm.
start to build this to being a contender. But like I said, given that you have a new head coach, you have a rookie quarterback who may or may not start this year, but you're developing him to be the future of your franchise. This is the most pivotal offseason you could argue in the last 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points you made there. And I want to allude back to the special teams. Is Cam McCord still on the team? He is, right? He's a special teams coordinator still.
So, no, it's Jeremy Springer, I think
Oh,
is
from the
the yeah,
Rams.
they
Yes,
hired it.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But
Okay.
the issue there, right? And I'm not trying to like single out Jeremy Springer.
Yeah.
The Rams were the one team in the NFL that had worse special teams by DVOA than the Patriots last year. Patriots were
Hmm.
31, Rams were 32. He spent some time in the college ranks as a special teams coordinator, and his special teams units were generally middle of the pack. I mean, they weren't terrible, but they were middle of the pack, not
Yep.
great. And that's something that, like, when I look at this Patriots coaching staff, so I was someone that I was hoping Belichick would get one more year, chance to turn it around.
Me
But I
too,
understand,
honestly.
yeah, but I understand why they made the move to move on, right? There had been bad drafts. There was the Patricia Judge thing 2 years ago. You won 4 games, right? So I get it. And I do like Mayo, but you have a rookie head coach and you have a defensive coordinator who I think is really good. And he was your first choice in DeMarcus Covington,
Hmm.
but your offensive coordinator and your special teams coordinator were not the first choices of the team. Their first choice ended up going to the Falcons for special teams coordinator, and their first choice for offensive coordinator was Zach Robinson. They didn't make that work out, so they got Alex
Hmm.
Van Pelt. So that's the only thing that worries me. And look, Ben McAdoo, I know he got kind of made fun of in New York, but he has a good track record of working with quarterbacks.
Hmm.
Alex Van Pelt had a pretty good offense last year with 5 different starting quarterbacks and different styles too. I mean, think about how different Deshaun Watson is from Joe Flacco, right? And he was able to have success with both of those guys. So I think they're good, but they're not the first choice. And are they as good as you could have gotten? And that's something that when you look at this team, I think they have a great defense. I think they're going to have one of the best defenses in the NFL. And part of that is the talent, part of that is the coaching staff. Offensively, you still have a hole at left tackle. We'll see if a core of 4 can be good.
Hmm.
You have a hole at number 1 wide receiver. We'll see if someone emerges. And you don't have your first choices on the offensive coaching staff. So it'd be one thing if you had an elite offensive coaching staff and maybe some talent questions or vice versa. But when you have questions at both, that's where I look at this team and I could see them lose, kind of like last year, losing a chunk of those one possession, 20 to 17, 17 to
Hmm.
13 type games. So I think they can be better than last year. It's just I look at this offense in this special teams unit, and I think both of these units have a long way to go from last year. And did they do enough this offseason to kind of bridge that gap from where they finished in January to where they need to be a good team?
Yeah, no, you make good points with the offense. Obviously, AVP, Alex Van Pelt moves from Cleveland. He's been around the league with Buffalo. He's worked with Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, yada, yada, yada. Decent quarterbacks in the league, obviously, good quarterbacks. But a name that you didn't mention that was in the running was what? Nick Haley, the former Patriot
Yeah.
staffer
And
there.
he would have been my choice, Ken, 2 years ago, right? When they hired,
Hmm.
or I should say, elevated, however you want to word it,
Yeah.
Patricia and Judge. Well, McDaniels leaves to go to the Raiders. You could have brought in Bill O'Brien from Alabama. Belichick
Hmm.
didn't want to do that for whatever reason. Um, I would have gone with Nick Haley as the next guy. He had been here since 2015, had won multiple Super Bowls as the tight ends coach. And a tight ends coach generally will know protection schemes because the
Yep.
tight ends work with the offensive line, but have an idea of the passing game because the tight ends have to run routes. So a tight ends coach, I think philosophically can slide in and do the job of offensive coordinator. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to do that. So Kaylee left and went to the Rams. I would have strongly considered bringing him back. I think he was
Hmm.
another guy they wanted instead of Alex Van Pelt, and they couldn't make it work. But I think it's a missed opportunity really 2 years ago to have Nick, because I think if Nick Haley had been their offensive coordinator 2 years ago, we might be having a different conversation about the Patriots right now. And I'm not saying they would have won a Super Bowl or anything like
Hmm.
that, but I mean, look at how poorly coached that offense was 2 years ago, and they still won 8 games. I mean, you have Nick Haley or Bill O'Brien 2 years ago. Insert someone that had a better grasp of offensive football. Maybe you win 9 games. Maybe you win 10. Maybe you make the playoffs. Mac Jones's development isn't as screwed up as it became. Maybe
Hmm.
he's better this year, right? And I'm not absolving Mac Jones. He was terrible in 2023. But I
Hmm.
think a lot of that goes back to They screwed up his development 2 years ago with a guy that, as we know, Ken, did not come into the league as the most talented guy, right? Like a lot of people point to Trevor Lawrence and, well, he had Urban Meyer and he was able to work past it. Well, Urban Meyer had to get fired, first of all. But
Hmm.
second of all, Trevor Lawrence's talent is on a different level than Mac Jones, right? So I think if maybe they had put Kaylee as the OC 2 years ago, or Bill O'Brien, or just somebody who was qualified, maybe we're having a much different conversation now. So yeah, that was another name I was hoping for this offseason as well, and they just weren't able to make it work. So that's the thing. You could even make the case Alex Van Pelt is their third choice,
Hmm.
fourth choice. I mean, what did they interview? Like 10 or 11 different candidates, whatever. Well, I mean, they were interviewing guys left and right. And it just, again, I'm not telling you he's a bad coach. He
Yeah.
did well last year in Cleveland. He's had a good coaching career, but not your first choice, not your second choice, maybe not your third or fourth choice. Like that kind of gives me some pause there.
And he's very run heavy. I mean, he had Chubb and Kareem Hunt in Cleveland. And
Sure.
what's the offense that he runs? Is it the West Coast offense or
Yeah.
just
It's
so
West
it's
Coast. It's heavy 11 personnel, which is
mhm,
one tight end, one running back on the field, three receivers, which look, the Patriots have Hunter Henry. They have Rhamondre Stevenson. The scheme is probably going to be solid for the Patriots, but they're still missing that number one outside receiver, and they're missing what their answer is going to be at left tackle. Now, they could find it. Maybe a core of four will be good,
mhm.
but those are things they're going to have to figure out as the season progresses. Like, what are we good at? What can we, really lean on here? And I think the running game is going to be a huge part of it, whether it's Jacoby Brissett all year, whether it's Drake May all year, whether it's a mix of the two. I think you're right. We're going to see this to be a heavy run
Mhm.
offense, heavy play action offense, heavy tight end offense. Like, don't be surprised Hunter Henry has a huge year, right? Because it's
Mhm.
going to be a heavy tight end offense. Demario Douglas, too, I think could be a big part of this offense. So that to me is going to be kind of what the offense is centered around: running game, play action, tight end.
And they also added Antonio Gibson from Washington that had a couple
Yep.
of good seasons. Obviously, it's two guys out of the backfield that can catch the ball pretty well. I mean, Stevenson's a good receiver, and I think Gibson's a fairly decent receiver out of the backfield.
Yeah, I mean, Stevenson 2 years ago had 69 catches, right? So, I mean,
Yeah,
he
it's
was
impressive.
arguably 2 years ago, he was their best receiver. And last year, I mean, look, he missed the final month of the season, got injured in that early December game against the Chargers,
Hmm.
still had 38 catches. So it wasn't on pace for that 69 number, but it was on pace probably to 50 catches or at
Yeah,
least
absolutely. 50 to
45, 46.
55.
Yeah. So if you pair that with Gibson, I think that's a nice option for you to have. And I think however they split out these carries is going to be interesting because I think the issue they had with Stevenson 2 years ago is he had 1,000 yards rushing, he had the 69 catches, but they really wore him out. And you
Hmm.
saw like Christmas Eve Cincinnati game a couple years ago. They were down, I think 22 to nothing or whatever it was.
They had a
They come
chance to
all
win that game.
they have a chance to win that game. Stevenson fumbles, and I sit there thinking, maybe if Stevenson was a little more well rested, that fumble doesn't happen, and the
Hmm.
Patriots win that game. So that's my only, and that's not just a Stevenson thing. You look across the NFL. I mean, Christian McCaffrey plays all the time. Jonathan Taylor, when he's healthy, plays pretty much all the
Hmm.
time. But Nick Chubb plays all the time when healthy. But there's not a lot of, I mean, those are three elite guys that play all the time. Not a
Yeah,
lot of guys play all the time. And even those guys sometimes will get a series off here and there.
they
So
do.
last year, I thought the Patriots did a better job of kind of rotating back. Zeke Elliott, I thought, played really well for them, especially when Stevenson got hurt. But
Hmm.
that's something to your point with Gibson, they need to make sure they balance this out well because I think Stevenson is a really talented back. I think he can be a top 10 back in the NFL, but they can't wear him down like they did a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think Gibson's on what, like a short 2 year deal with the Pats anyways, like for low money.
Yeah, and it's something that's affordable, and I think he's a
Hmm.
nice complementary piece. If he can give you, Ken, what Zeke Elliott gave you last year,
Perfect.
yeah, and maybe maybe more catches and fewer rushing yards, but kind of the same overall yards from scrimmage, that's a win. Like that's what you got out of Zeke Elliott last year, I think is the ideal complement to a guy like Stevenson. Just enough that you can take Stevenson off the field. The defense still has to respect the guy in the backfield. He can still gain your yards on the ground and in the passing game,
Hmm.
but Stevenson is the lead dog. And I think if you get that out of Gibson, that's all you can ask for. That's a win.
I mean, Stevenson's a guaranteed what, three down back. So I mean, obviously he's going to be swapped out with Gibson, either third, whatever. Fourth down's usually an automatic
Yeah.
punt, depending on the situation, game situation. But I mean, staying on the Stevenson topic, I'm a fan of the contract. Hearing it about like around the media world, not many people are really fan of the contract. I'm like, he's 26. I'm like, it only kicks in what next year in 2025 because he's still under his rookie deal. So I don't mind him being 30, 31, and then maybe he'll test the market after that. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, and look, it's a 4-year deal,
Hmm.
36 million. And when you see 4 and 36, that you know, okay, that jumps out.
Yeah,
It's
it's an eye catcher.
17 guaranteed. They have a ton of money to spend. And I think, look, that's the sixth highest running back contract by average annual value in the NFL right now.
Hmm.
Is he the sixth best running back? Now, maybe he's closer to 8 or 9. Does he have the potential to be the sixth best? I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
2 years ago, like I said, 1,000 yards rushing, 400 yards on the, in the passing game. He was the 11th graded running back by Pro Football Focus. So if he just improves on that, he'll be fine. He'll be right in that 6 to
Hmm.
7 to 8 range. And look, I look at, is it a little bit of an overpay? Sure, but I'm not upset about it because he's a good player. He's going to be a big part of what they do. It's not going to hurt them at all going forward financially. And if you look at this team, not just this year, Ken, but really look at 2025, Drake May is going to be your starter in
Oh,
2025,
absolutely.
right? Like,
100%.
yeah, so we don't know about 2024. Maybe he'll start all year, maybe he'll start 0 games. But by
Hmm.
2025, he's going to be playing. So what do you want to rely on? A good running back in with a young quarterback. So I think Rhamondre can be that guy that
Hmm.
they can lean on once Drake May takes over. Same thing with some of the young offensive linemen they drafted and the re-signing of Mike Onwenu. Hopefully not right now, but by 2025, those are elements that they can lean on with a young quarterback.
Yeah, and Stevenson can obviously help May, work with Brissett.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're veterans in the league as well. But jumping around, wide receiver group, I'm a fan of Jalen Polk. I don't know a lot about him. Javon Baker, he looks well too. And the guy's coming back. I mean, Kenny Bourne signed that, what, 3, 4 year deal to stay in New England. It seemed like he didn't want to go elsewhere. He's recovering from what the ACL injury that he suffered in
Yeah.
Miami last year. Pop Douglas, he looks like a stud that could play the slot. He could play anywhere, honestly. Juju, who knows what his future holds? Obviously, he's on that short-term deal, but I guess he's not a lock to make the roster. But what's your thoughts on the wide receiver corps for sure?
So you just named a lot of guys, Ken, that I
Hmm.
think are, and I don't think Juju Smith-Schuster is going to contribute to the team,
Probably
and
not
I don't
much.
necessarily think Tyquan Thornton is either. We'll
Hmm.
see on him though. He's bulked up, so I want to see what he has in training camp. You named a lot of guys though that I think are pretty good players. You didn't name anyone though that a defensive coordinator looks at and says, "Oh, we got to be careful of this
Double
guy,
team,
right?
yeah.
We got to worry about." And here's the thing, right? A lot of people always say, "Oh, you got to have the number one receiver," and then there's other people who say, "Well, the Patriots won Super Bowls without a number one
Hmm.
receiver." But here's the thing: in all those Brady years, Ken, or basically all of them, they had somebody on offense besides Brady that was an A+ weapon. And
Hmm.
but people forget that it wasn't always just, Randy Moss on the outside or
No,
number.
it
It
wasn't.
was in 2001, Troy Brown had 101 catches and David
Hmm.
Patton was a really good receiver. In 2003 and 4, Dion Branch was a great player. He won the Super Bowl MVP in '04. And then you look at the last 3 Super Bowls, Rob Gronkowski is the best tight end of all time. He played in 2 of those Super Bowls, and the one he didn't, you had Hogan, Edelman, Amendola. Like those were great. Chris Hogan in 2016 led the NFL in yards per reception. So I know no one sits here and thinks of Hogan as a star. He's not. He wasn't. But that
For
year,
us, he was.
and right, and that year he played like a star. And
Hmm.
Edelman was an elite player by that point. So my point being is if you're going to be an effective offense, you have to have a good quarterback and you have to have a good offensive line. Those are non-negotiable. But you also have to have one guy who is an A+ weapon. I mean, you could even I know it's a different league, but like in 2004, Corey Dillon was one of the best offensive players in the NFL, right?
And that was a free agent signing by the
It
Pats
was a
from
trade, but yeah.
Cincinnati. Oh, a trade.
Uh,
Okay, I'm sorry.
but point being, it's a guy right they brought in.
Hmm.
So I don't think like Hunter Henry is a good, very good player, right? I think Jalen Polk can be a good player. I think Kendrick Bourne is a very good to very good player. But
Hmm.
there's nobody there, whether it's a tight end, a receiver, or even a back, that you look at as in the passing game as an A+ weapon. And that's what concerns me. Because you look at this again, I like Kendrick Bourne a lot. He had was it 800 yards receiving in 2021, and then last year he was on pace to break that before he got hurt. Like this is a good player who's still in his
Hmm.
mid 20s, right? I think Jalen Polk, to me, his ceiling is a number 2 receiver. And I think one of the reasons they drafted him, He spent 59% of his snaps out wide last year in Washington,
Hmm.
41% in the slot. So if they end up getting, let's just say Javon Baker becomes a number one receiver and you have him outside and Bourne outside. Well, then you can have Polk play in the slot. But let's say Demario Douglas ends up being, the next coming of Julian Edelman and he's an elite slot receiver. Then you can have Polk play outside. That
Hmm.
versatility, I think, helps them a lot. Or what if Brandon Ayuk in next week says, I'm not coming to training camp, trade me, and they get Brandon Ayuk from the 49ers? Well, then you can move Polk around Ayuk and
Yep.
kind of see what works. So that what I like about Polk is I think he's a good player. I think he can be a good NFL player, maybe a very good player, but that versatility I like a lot because I look at him as a future wide receiver 2 on a really good offense, which by the way, Ken, there's a lot of value in that. Like I know
There
people
is.
are like, "Oh, he's not going to be a number 1." Well,
Not right
okay,
away.
I mean, you look at the Patriots Super Bowl teams, Rob Gronkowski was the best player, not named Brady on offense, but
Hmm.
Julian Edelman was really important. He was the second best, or Danny Amendola was really important. Like, if that's what you get out of Jalen Polk, that's really good. Or even not quite that, but close. Like, that's really good. So I still think they're a piece short there, though. That elite number one receiver, or again, could be a tight end, but that elite number one playmaker in the passing game on offense, I just don't see that guy there. And I'm really excited for training camp to
Hmm.
see Javon Baker and to see Jalen Polk because maybe they exceed my expectations. One of them is a number one and then they're in business. But if not, I think it's going to fall a lot more on Van Pelt to scheme these guys open more so than offenses that have that guy.
Yeah, I think that, obviously they got to be broken in, training camp. They've been going through OTAs, yada, yada, yada. They'll probably be broken into the preseason, play a few snaps. But I don't know if these guys, they're going to be basically thrown into the offense by week one. I mean, your opinion on that? Are they just going to be heavily
Yeah.
involved or are they just gradually going to go in as the weeks go on? Because it's a gauntlet the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season for the
Yeah, I
Pats.
mean the Patriots schedule is brutal all
It
year, but
is.
you're right. Those first, 5 weeks
Yep.
is really tough. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to, Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas are going to be your top two receivers,
Hmm.
and then that because I'm assuming they're going to do a lot of 11 personnel with Hunter Henry at tight
Yep.
end. So that third guy, I think it's going to be either Polk or Baker, maybe Tyquan Thornton surprises us, but it's going to be out of kind of that group of guys because I feel like Bourne and Douglas are kind of locks to be on the field. As long as they're
Hmm.
healthy, they're the best guys and they're good. That third spot, I think, is going to be all right. Who is the best of the rest? Is it Baker? Is it Polk? Is it Smith Schuster? Is it Tyquan Thornton? Whoever that guy is. And if it's none of them, maybe we see a lot of two backs or two tight end stuff. I don't know.
Hmm.
But I think it's going to be, and I wouldn't be shocked, Ken, if it's Polk or depending on what they like, if it's Javon Baker, because he's a bigger guy or a 6'1, 208,
Hmm.
big guy, really good with the, as a jump ball receiver. Maybe it's just that element they want out there. So I could see them having a rotation, but it's going to be kind of that. And I wouldn't be shocked, like maybe it's KJ Osborne, but I wouldn't be shocked if Baker and Polk both make the team and maybe Smith Schuster and Osborne don't because they just look towards the younger players and kind of working them in as the season goes along.
Yeah, good point you make about Juju. What can they do with him? Can they just trade him and, take some of his salary, or what can they really get for him
Yeah.
as terms as like value wise? Can they get a player? Can they get a draft pick? Your
It's
thoughts
tough
on
because,
Juju?
I mean, Ken, if you're an opposing NFL GM, do you want that guy?
Yeah, that's the
I mean, think
thing.
of he
With a messed
barely
up
played.
knee too.
Right, messed up knee, did not play all of last season.
Hmm.
When he played, he wasn't effective. So, and he's got a big contract. Like, do you want that guy if you're an opposing GM? So, I think what's going to happen is they're going to bring him to training camp. If he's good, let's say he's fully healthy and he looks like the Juju Smith Schuster that had, what was it, 97 catches a year in Pittsburgh, right?
Hmm.
Then fine, keep him. And he looks great. If he doesn't look good, they might just cut him and eat the money. Like, they have a ton of cap space, they have
Yep.
a ton of money left. They don't have to worry about it and they just play the younger guys. But I just don't see a trade there unless a team has, let's say a team has two receiver injuries and Smith Schuster looks good in the preseason. Maybe they can get like a seventh round pick or something full. But that's really it to me because, again, hasn't been healthy, hasn't been effective, is owed a decent amount of money. So I just look at it as they're, I'd be shocked if they trade him. It's going to, again, take multiple injuries on a team and it'd still probably only be a seventh round pick. I think they bring him to camp and I think they see what happens from there.
I mean, yeah, they need to basically evaluate what they have on offense with between the rookies and the
Yeah.
veteran guys and all that good stuff. But going back, I know we're short on time here. The schedule. Cincinnati and San Fran in the first 5 or 6 weeks, like it is going to be pretty brutal for the Pats. I mean, that people are already writing them off 0-4, 1-5, 2-3 at bet. It's like, what's your
Yeah.
thoughts quickly on the schedule, seeing we
Yeah,
got
it's
some
it's
time?
brutal, right? And that Seattle game is the one maybe I look at early in the year they can win. And Seattle is more talented than them,
That's the
but
home opener, isn't it?
right, but
Yeah.
Seattle's a team that has a rookie head coach. They're
Hmm.
coming across the country for a 1 p.m. game. Like that's a spot maybe you can get that game, but like Cincinnati, I know Cincinnati traditionally starts slow, but they had a disappointing end to last year with Joe Burrow injured. I think they're going to come out hot. San Fran is still probably the most talented team in the NFL. They were just in the Super Bowl in overtime
Hmm.
last year. Miami, we know, they're really good. I'm assuming this time Aaron Rodgers will be healthy when the Patriots
Yeah,
play the Jets.
he
And
should.
what I really don't like about this schedule, and I actually think the NFL screwed the Patriots on this. So they have a flight all the way out to San Francisco.
Hmm.
They also have a game in Arizona. They didn't make those games back to back so the team could stay out there. So they have to make two separate West Coast
West
trips,
Coast trips,
one
yeah.
early in the season, one late in the season.
Hmm.
And in between those, Ken, they have to go to London. And after London, they don't have a bye week, which is surprising. I think pretty much every team that's played in London has almost always had a bye week the week after London. So they have these three long trips, no nothing off the week after. So I
Hmm.
think they kind of got screwed there. And that end of the season stretch where they play the Bills twice, we know how good the Bills are. And then in the middle, they play the Chargers, a team that last year came to Foxborough and won. Now they have Jim Harbaugh. That's going to be a tough game. So, yeah, I think it's an extremely difficult schedule. I think we're going to look back on it, Ken, in January or February is one of, if not the most difficult schedules any team has in the NFL all year.
Hmm. I mean, didn't they have the opportunity to have a bye week after London, and they probably chose not to?
I think the NFL sets that, so I'm not sure if they chose or not. I found that personally surprising
Hmm.
because I think
Yeah.
whenever they've played overseas before, they've had a bye week the week after, and I feel like pretty much every team that does has a bye week after. So I did find that surprising, especially considering too, you have the two separate West Coast trips. Like
Yeah, that doesn't make
yeah,
sense.
that's tough there. But it's really to me, it's a bad year to play the NFC West. San
Hmm.
Fran's one of the best teams in the league. The Rams are good. Seattle, you might be getting at a good time, but they're still a good team. We'll see Arizona. I think they're frauds, but they'll be better than they were a year. They'll be better than they were a year ago, at least. Like it's a bad time to play the NFC West, unfortunately. So it's a tough, tough schedule they have this year.
With a minute remaining here, thoughts on over and under? Do they get over 5 wins? Do they get below 5 wins? Is it another obviously rebuild year? Are they a playoff fringe team? Your thoughts, quick.
I think they can get to 6, maybe 7 wins. And I think
Hmm.
it's because again, they won 4 games last year with an atrocious offense. Really, just numbers wise, they get the worst quarterback play in the league. Receivers cost them. I mean, if Devontae Parker makes that catch against the Raiders, that's another win. If
Hmm.
Tyquan Thornton makes a catch against the Chargers, that's another win, right? So it's not like they were getting blown out every week. Washington, Jalen Rager drops a deep, deep touchdown pass. Then Juju Smith-Schuster has one hit off his hands on the final possession that's picked. Like that could have been another win. So I think they can get to 6 or 7. I think what's going to hurt them is how good the schedule is. If they were playing last year's schedule, I'd sit here and say, oh, they'll get to 7, right?
Hmm.
With this year's schedule, I think they could get to 7. I think it's going to be 6, though.
6. Well, with that, I appreciate it, John. I mean, tell everybody where they can find you. And like I said, I appreciate you coming on the Ken Matias Sports Podcast for
I
sure.
appreciate you having me, Ken. You can find me on Twitter at the real Jon Lyons. You can also find me on WEEI pretty much every weekend and some nights as well. And New England Football Journal, Patriots post game, Tuesday night show in the off season as well. So I kind of keep myself busy, like I said earlier. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again.